Greetings to all of you in YouTube land. I was uh, listening to a debate recently, a debate slash dialogue between Richard Dawkins and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Um, Now, in this debate, Richard Dawkins said something which he also wrote in his book, The God Delusion. In that book, he sets up a scale from 1 to 7. 7 meaning that if you fall on 7 on the scale, you are absolutely certain that there is no God, beyond any shadow of a doubt, and beyond that, beyond any doubt whatsoever. Well, Dawkins says that he is a 6.9 on the scale, and in justification of that belief, he will he gave in his book what he called the ultimate Boeing 747 argument. So that argument was intended by Richard Dawkins to be a probabilistic argument for atheism. And because of that, again, he is 6.9 out of 7 sure that God does not exist. Okay, well, keep that. Well, let me take that a little bit further. If you are 6.9 on the scale from 1 to 7 that God doesn't exist, then what are you on the scale from 1 to 7 that God does exist? You are 0.1. So on a scale of 7, 7 being total apodictic certitude that there is a God, Richard Dawkins is 0.1. Now that is not very good. We wish that it was higher. You could say that he is allowing for there to be a chance that God exists, but of course that's not the point of his 6.9 number. It's to say how sure that he is that God doesn't exist. But still, the door is open for a divine foot in the door. There is at least a non-zero probability, however small, infinitesimally small, but non-zero, that God could possibly exist, according to Richard Dawkins. Okay, now keep that in mind, that as we turn to the modal ontological argument for the existence of God. The modal ontological argument can be formed, or can be stated in the form of modus ponens. Modus ponens, to remind us, is an argument of the form if P then Q, and P therefore Q. If Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Okay, now a modus ponens, that kind of an argument is formally valid. It's readily widely known. It's readily available to find it if you don't know. So I don't want you to take my word for it if you're unfamiliar with basic modern logic. Modus ponens is considered logically valid. The only question to ask is, are the premises true? If the premises are true in a modus ponens argument, then the conclusion absolutely follows a 7 on the scale, apodictic certainty. Okay, so here's the argument. Premise 1: if it's possible that God exists, then God does exist. Premise 2: it is possible that God exists, and then the conclusion, therefore God exists. So that argument proves, if the premises are true, that God exists, and there's no way around that other than to deny one of the premises. Okay, well, the first premise, if it is possible that God exists, then God exists, that sounds at first blush very highly ludicrous, and it seems like it has to be wrong. Um, to us. The second premise doesn't seem too terribly controversial. It seems fairly innocuous. Um, it is possible that God exists. Um, well, it's a bit counterintuitive, um, but actually it's the other way around. As it turns out, if it is possible that God exists, then God exists. That actually is a uh, premise that most people would grant. Most people that are familiar with um, um, modal logic and the modal ontological argument. And that's not people that believe in God only. That's all people that are familiar with modal logic. Now, to kind of explain why that is, to kind of give you a feeling for why that is a very plausible supposition or presupposition that if God possibly exists, then He does exist. God is uh, thought to be a necessary being. He's conceived of as being a necessary being. A necessary being, if such a being exists, would exist in every logically possible world. In every logically conceivable world, there is a necessary being, if that necessary being exists. If that necessary being does not exist, then the being would not really be a necessary being, but that being would be impossible. So, according to modal logic and the classical theism in the Anselmian tradition of perfect being theology, from those we conclude, whether we believe in God or not, that God must exist in all logically possible worlds or in no logically possible worlds. So if God is possible, if God possibly exists, then He will exist in at least one logically possible world. But because He is necessary, He will exist in all logically possible worlds, including our own. So God would exist if it is possible that He exists. So the first premise of the modal ontological argument is not controversial. It is the second argument, or the second premise rather, of the argument that is controversial, that it is possible that God exists. Well, Richard Dawkins admits that on a scale of 7, he is 0.1%, or well, not percent, but he scores a 0.1 on a scale of 1 to 7 that God exists. So it's highly unlikely, it's extremely improbable and implausible, according to Richard Dawkins. But there is a very, very, very ridiculously small possibility that God might actually exist. But in that case, Dawkins would have to concede that it is possible that God does in fact exist. Whether He does or not, it's a possibility. Therefore, he grants the only controversial premise of the of the argument, of the modal ontological argument. Therefore, if he is consistent, if he is rational, he must conclude that God exists. Also, I believe it is in the God delusion, but somewheres apparently he has said that it's been a while since I've read the God delusion, but I think I remember reading that in there, that the cosmological argument for the existence of God has true premises, but the conclusion may be rejected because it does not prove necessarily that the Creator is the God of the Christian Bible. So that argument is valid, logically, formally valid, and it has true premises according to Richard Dawkins. Therefore, he must concede the conclusion as well. So Richard Dawkins should, if he is going to be rational, he should um, conclude that God does in fact exist. Thank you for watching. Please comment below, and shalom out.